Russian troops did not allow Chechen soldiers to enter the border with Belarus. The mistake made by Russian troops in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine has driven a wedge between Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Chechen leader Kadyrov. Chechen soldiers fighting against Ukraine in the ranks of Russia were caught by Russian troops on the border with Belarus as they tried to escape from Ukrainian territory. Some Chechen soldiers who have been fighting for Russia in Ukraine since the beginning of the war have started to rally. The war that has been going on for a long time must have started to negatively affect the psychology of Russian and Chechen soldiers. So far, many Russian soldiers have managed to escape from the battlefield. In the past days, Andrei Medvedev, who was the commander of the Wagner mercenaries, fled the battlefield and requested asylum in Norway. We can see that soldiers affected by the unfavorable conditions on the battlefield can no longer stand to stay at the front. Chechen soldiers who have been at the front for a long time are here not by their own will, but by the order of their leader Kadyrov. The groupings that have emerged among Chechen soldiers show that many Chechen soldiers are not happy to be in Ukraine. The city of Chernihiv, where Chechen soldiers are stationed on Kadyrov's orders, has been under Russian occupation for a long time. Chernihiv, a border city with Belarus, is also home to hundreds of Chechen soldiers. Late at night, a group of 42 Chechen soldiers trying to leave Ukrainian territory through the Belarusian border was spotted by Russian soldiers. The Chechen soldiers took off their uniforms, dressed in civilian clothes, and tried to enter the Belarusian border, but they failed. Russian soldiers in Chernihiv mistook the Chechen soldiers flying to flee for Ukrainian soldiers, and a prolonged clash broke out between the two groups. The Chechen soldiers who lost their lives before they could approach the Belarusian border were identified as Kadyrov soldiers. Although it was thought that the soldiers who tried to escape were Chechen soldiers stationed in Chernihiv, it turned out that this team of 42 people was a group of soldiers from a 600-strong Chechen battalion that Kadyrov had sent to Kharkiv. The distance between Chernihiv and Kharkiv is more about 500 kilometers. How the Chechen soldiers reached Chernihiv remains a question mark. It is claimed that Ramzan Kadyrov had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin upon learning that his own soldiers were killed, and that Chechen leader Kadyrov fired back at Russian President Putin during the phone call. Normally, it is known that these two are very good friends, but now the internal crisis in Chechnya threatens Ramzan Kadyrov's throne. Chechen citizens have been resisting Kadyrov for a long time because they were forcibly sent to Ukraine to fight. The families of Chechen soldiers who went to fight have been protesting in many parts of the city to show their reaction to Kadyrov. Kadyrov, who is aware that the situation will worsen when the news of the Chechen soldiers who lost their lives spread in Chechnya, asked Putin for help to remedy the situation. However, when Putin said that the soldiers who lost their lives were soldiers trying to escape, and that they should be declared traitors, the tension between the two increased. With these statements of Putin, Kadyrov had to handle the situation alone. Although there are many Chechen soldiers on the side of Russia, there are also Chechen soldiers fighting alongside the Ukrainian army. Some Chechen soldiers in Chechnya prefer to fight voluntarily on Ukrainian side. The most well-known group among these soldiers is the Chechen battalion that calls itself the Sheikh Mansour Battalion. The battalion's commander, Muslim Chabarno, said they had come to take revenge of Putin and would not allow Russian forces to occupy Ukrainian territory. The Chechen commander stated that they do not recognize Ramzan Kadyrov as a Chechen citizen, that Kadyrov is a Russian and an enemy of Chechnya. Ramzan Kadyrov has sent the majority of Chechenya's soldiers to Ukraine to show his loyalty to Vladimir Putin. He also announced that every healthy citizen under the age of 50 who wants to fight on Ukrainian soil will be given 300,000 rubles if they voluntarily go to Ukraine. Russian leader Putin was trying to successfully complete his occupation of Ukrainian territory by using all the means at his disposal. However, the prolongation of the war has thwarted Putin's plans. Recently, soldiers fighting on behalf of Russia, including many Russian soldiers, have started to leave the front lines. The majority of the soldiers who fled the front were sent to Ukraine with the decision of partial mobilization. The hopes of the soldiers sent to Ukraine by Putin are about to run out. While the Ukrainian army's pressure is increasing day by day, the Russian army can only defend the occupied territories. The war between the two sides is now in its 11th month. Although the soldiers on the front line are immersed in negative thoughts due to the war conditions, the situation in the country is no different. Due to the sanctions and embargoes imposed on Russia by the US and Western countries, the inflation rate in the country has started to rise considerably. Russian citizens who are uncomfortable with this situation are not at all satisfied with their situation. When the cost of living in the country started to be reflected in the pockets of Russian citizens, the number of people against Putin started to increase considerably. Although the Russian army has entered Ukrainian territory, the vast majority of the people do not find Putin's decision right. Although the majority of the people want Putin to withdraw from Ukraine, Putin continues to do his own thing. This leads to an increase in protests and riots within Russia. Putin, who wants to prevent protests within the country, has given full authority to the Russian security forces. In other words, Russian security forces can easily intervene in any action initiated within the country. We have seen many examples of this during the war. Many anti-war protesters were interrogated or imprisoned by Russian security forces. But Putin not only did this, he also prevented Russian television channels from broadcasting anti-war programs. In the early months of the war, Russian TV anchor Marina Olsyanikova unfurled an anti-war banner during a news program. Olsyanikova was interrogated by Russian security forces after this action and sentenced to house arrest. The court case between the Russian government and Olsyanikova is still ongoing. Even though Putin tried to prevent protests in the country, Russian citizens continue to protest in secret. Many Russian propagandists organize anti-Putin protests by secretly hanging banners at different places in the country. In recent months, a secret activist who did not want to say his name had an interview with an American BBC reporter. The activist stated that they were tired of Vladimir Putin's oppression in the country, that Putin had committed war crimes on Ukrainian territory, and that they would continue to do whatever they could about it. Stating that they will continue to protest in places where there are no cameras and in the middle of the night. The secret activists stated that they are unstoppable. It seems that even though Russian leader Putin is trying to put pressure on the people, Russian citizens find a way to get rid of Putin's pressure.
It is not Germany's intention to transfer any of its tanks to Ukraine. Boris Pistorius, the German Minister of Defense, stated that despite the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, requested that a decision be made at the Ukraine Aid Conference to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, no such decision was made. Pistorius stated to the media present at the meeting that was placed at Ramstein Air Base that we still cannot tell when the decision will be reached on the topic of the Leopard tanks and what that conclusion will be. Before the summit, there was an anticipation that a decision would be taken to supply tanks to Ukraine, with certain European nations increasing the amount of pressure they are putting on Ukraine. In addition, the German Minister of Defense refuted allegations that his nation was simply opposed to the transfer of tanks by stating that against a unified alliance it is incorrect that Germany opposes it alone. Germany is criticized. Pistorius added that in the event that a favorable judgment is reached, he has requested that an inventory count be carried out to facilitate speedy delivery of the product. Countries including Finland and Poland voiced their strong disapproval of Germany's reluctance to hand over the tanks. The sale of Leopard 2 tanks to third countries requires authorization from Berlin, which is held up because both of these nations already own the tanks. During his remarks at the conference, which took place via video connection, the head of Ukraine, Zelensky, requested that Western allies accelerate the delivery of armaments to his country. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Germany emerged as a significant exporter of weapons to that country. On the other hand, he did not provide his consent for the shipment of Leopard 2 tanks. Germany is reluctant to send tanks. According to sources within the German government, Germany will send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine if the United States sends Abrams tanks there. The United States of America has stated that it would not comply with the request because they believe that it would be unfeasible to transport Abrams tanks to Ukraine because of the requirements for fuel and maintenance. During the meeting of NATO defense ministers, U.S. Secretary of State Lloyd Austin urged his other partners to increase the amount of aid they offer to the government in Kiev. The implication of Russia is not maintained. Russia is in the process of reforming, recruiting, and attempting to re-equip its military. Now is not the time to let up on the pace. It is time to provide greater assistance, Austin stated. The United States government has given its approval to a new military aid package of $2.5 billion, which will include additional armored vehicles and ammunition. The Pentagon, which oversees the United States Department of Defense, has decided to ship military supplies to Kiev. These supplies will include 59 Bradley armored vehicles, 90 Stryker personnel carriers, and Avenger air defense systems. According to a statement released by the Pentagon, recent Russian airstrikes have brought attention to the brutal conflict in Ukraine, and it was also said that more supplies will help to defend against such assaults. Statement as a possible act of aggression on the part of Russia indicating that Russian tanks accidentally hit Chechen soldiers, details to follow. On the other side, the spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, said that the introduction of additional tanks to Ukraine by the West would not alter the path that the conflict was taking and that the people of Ukraine would only make the situation worse. On the other hand, a number of nations, notably the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, have pledged to give Ukraine a new assistance package. Following their meeting at a military installation in Estonia, representatives from 11 different nations came to the conclusion that they should boost the amount of help that they provide to Ukraine in the form of armaments to prevent Russia from gaining ground. More assistance for the government in Kiev has been pledged by the countries of Britain, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Denmark, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Netherlands, and Slovakia. Ukraine refugee porn. Shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, complaints of human trafficking began streaming into the office of the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, in Vienna. These reports began pouring in shortly after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. An increase in the number of sexually explicit internet searches regarding Ukrainian women and girls was discovered by the OSCE. Although it varies from nation to country, there was a 600% rise in the number of searches that included the term Ukrainian together with the phrases escort, porn, or rape. This was observed in a variety of countries. One of the most frequently used search terms was pornography of Ukrainian refugees. It was found that 30 of the 48 men who were detained in March, shortly after the start of the conflict in Sweden, where it is forbidden to offer inducements for sex in exchange for money, searched exclusively for Ukrainian women. The alluring hope of quick money. The following months saw an escalation in hostilities, which led to a rise in the number of individuals fleeing Ukraine. People were frequently forced to seek sanctuary in nations in which they were unable to communicate in their native tongue and in which they had almost no social network. Women and children made up more than 90% of the population that emigrated from the country. The staff of the OSCE discovered a rise in the number of questionable job ads in Facebook groups and Telegram discussions, both of which are utilized regularly by Ukrainians to obtain information about leaving the country. These advertisements encourage women and young girls to apply for easy money employment such as accompanying clients. To educate Ukrainians about the perils posed by people traffickers, the OSCE has established a website and a helpline. Ukrainian women face sexual abuse. The website, which informs users in English, Russian, and Ukrainian, asserts that there is proof that Ukrainian women are sexually harassed and forced to work in countries of refuge, adding that the website is aired in all 3 languages. It is recommended that anyone leaving Ukraine to upload their identification information to the DIYA application that was developed by the Ukrainian government, that they never travel anywhere alone with foreigners, that they inform others about their travel plans, that they seek assistance only from official authorities, and that they establish code words to communicate with their relatives when they are in potentially dangerous situations. Where do women face the most danger? When asked if there is a country in which Ukrainian women and girls are more likely to be exploited, staff from the OSCE responded that a human smuggler would prefer to work in a country where sex for money is not prohibited. They went on to say that they choose places where they can earn more money and where the market is large. Chechen soldiers were accidentally struck by Russian tanks, details coming soon. Explain the concept of the Nordic model. Those who do not supply sexual services are subject to punishment in the nations of Scandinavia, which together make up the Nordic model. Because of this, it is now much simpler to bring criminal charges against both traffickers and their buyers. According to the OSCE, there are a lot of individuals living in Europe who support the idea of making sexual labor legal in many different nations. At this juncture, the OSCE stresses the need of educating young men about the concept of mutual consent and constructive behavior as the answer to the problem. In the Wagner group, a psychopath is in the driver's seat. It was said that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Russian mercenary organization Wagner Group, admitted an employee to the hospital while the employee was working for him in his restaurant. The employee stated that he worked at the Concord catering firm owned by Prigozhin for a length of time and maintained that the incident took place following a dispute with the customer. He made these statements in an interview with the French Society magazine. The worker, who was 40 years old and did not reveal his identity, stated that the customer had sent back his plate, claiming that the tomatoes in his food had gone bad, which infuriated Prigozhin, who, in response, had the cook who was responsible for the dish beaten in the basement. The worker claimed that he was the one who had been beaten. According to the worker, the chief, who had been battered by Prigozhin, had fallen into a coma and needed to be treated in the hospital for a period of 2 months. Another individual, who did not reveal his identity and stated that he had departed Russia, asserted that he witnessed with his own eyes Prigozhin taking the workers whom he suspected of stealing food into the forest and beating them. This individual stated that he had escaped Russia. Additionally, the former worker said that Prigozhin would frequently joke about entering the staff room with a handgun in his possession and stating, "Let's have a conversation with you, shall we? I shall murder you." We couldn't think of the possibility of dying in a vehicle accident or getting attacked in the street. The worker, who stated that he was particularly worried about his safety while he worked at Prigozhin's restaurant in Russia, said, "We couldn't think of the possibility of dying in a car accident." There was no information provided on the times that these occurrences took place. Prigozhin is also known as Putin's chef because he was in charge of providing catering services for occasions that Russian President Vladimir Putin and his entourage attended. War is managed poorly. According to statements made by authorities from the United States of America, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the owner of the Russian mercenary outfit Wagner Group and a billionaire businessman, allegedly had a conversation with President Vladimir Putin and informed him that the war was being poorly managed. The assertions of 2 top American officials, who did not wish to expose their identities, were featured in the news that was published in one of the most influential publications in the United States. It was reported that Prigozhin had communicated with Putin and informed him that the Russian army had been poorly managed throughout the conflict and that mistakes had been made on the front lines. It was also claimed that Prigozhin complained that the Russian Ministry of Defense had considerably profited from Wagner but had not provided the required cash and resources to the firm in return. This was one of the allegations that were made against him. According to the reports, Prigozhin fabricated the video that was shared on social media in which Wagner soldiers said they did not have access to the most fundamental supplies of food and equipment to exert pressure on the Kremlin. On the other hand, details on the time and place of the meeting between the head of the Russian government and the founder of the mercenary business Wagner were not disclosed. Prigozhin, on the other hand, has denied the allegations and argued that he did not meet with Putin and did not criticize the way the Russian army was managed during the conflict in Ukraine. Prigozhin has also stated that he did not criticize the way the Russian army was managed during the conflict in Ukraine. Chechen soldiers were accidentally struck by Russian tanks, details coming soon. The history of Wagner. It was stated that soldiers from Wagner took part in the operations designed to seize the city of Bakhmut in Donetsk in the intelligence assessment that was issued by the British Ministry of Defense the previous week. Bakhmut is located in Donetsk. The United States of America also asserted that Moscow made use of Wagner mercenaries to make up for the casualties it sustained throughout the conflict. In September, Prigozhin visited a Russian jail where he spoke to the convicts and invited them to join Wagner and the resistance movement. He is known as the chief for operating the food business at the Kremlin Palace. The Russian magnate had previously stated in his speech to the detained individuals that he would be freed in exchange for serving on behalf of Wagner in the front for a period of 6 months. The Kremlin has denied on many occasions that it has any connection to Wagner. Is it possible to exclude Russia from Ukraine? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, recently gave an interview to the press. According to Milley, I think it is very difficult to remove Russian forces from the territory held by Russia this year from a military standpoint. However, this does not always imply that it is not conceivable. I believe that what may take place is a steady defense along the front. He remarked, it all relies on education. Russia had a great loss. Milley indicated that it was conceivable for the Ukrainian army to strike and conquer some territories from Russia, and he added that Russia had incurred significant casualties due to this conflict. The following is what Milley had to say regarding the number of casualties suffered by Russia's armed forces. The number of casualties in conflicts is always debatable. The last time I mentioned Russia's casualties, I stated that there were over 100,000 of them. I can confirm that it is now far greater than that. Milley stated that Ukraine also sustained extremely terrible casualties, including civilians, and that Russia will boost its personnel by recruiting 250,000 people. Russia is inflicting very serious losses, as well as mercenary groups like Wagner and other troops. Chechen soldiers were accidentally struck by Russian tanks. The fight is still going on in its full might. The most recent information received from the battlefield indicates that Russian tanks have killed Chechen troops. According to the statement, Chechen forces that had been stationed in the southeastern area of Ukraine have been moved to the northern outskirts of the city of Poltava in Ukraine. During their flight from the Ukrainian forces, 600 Chechen fighters fought alongside Ukrainian soldiers and penetrated the area of a Russian tank battalion. A tank attack carried out by Russian forces, who were unaware that the soldiers in the vicinity were Chechen soldiers, resulted in the unintentional deaths of Chechen soldiers. It was reported that 42 out of 600 Chechen soldiers managed to escape and were eventually taken captive by Ukrainian troops. Anti-Putin protests increased in Russia. The fact that Putin was unable to win victory in Ukraine and that he drove the Russian people to war enhanced the number of demonstrations that took place within the nation. On social media, millions of Russian civilians demanded that Vladimir Putin bring an end to the conflict. The Russian demonstrators who went to the streets were quickly apprehended and taken into custody by the authorities. According to Putin's closest circle, the Russian president is worried about a military putsch, an assassination, and a widespread populist rebellion. Putin is doing all in his power to avoid this from taking place, but the Russian people are having a hard time preventing him from doing so. A multitude of anti-Putin campaigns has been initiated by Russian citizens. If Putin is not deterred by them, a major rebellion will be sparked as a result.
He wanted to feel like a god. She liked the vampirism. She liked the blood.
They found him very romantic and very enthralling.
If you wanted to drink and do drugs, go ahead. If you wanted to have sex, go ahead. As a charismatic leader, Rod had a gift. Sadly, it was just a deadly gift.
Naayos natin po yun.
3 days before Thanksgiving in Eustis, Florida, 17-year-old Jennifer Wendorf returns home late after a night out.
Jennifer comes home about 10:30. She sees her dad's feet on the couch. She thinks Dad just fell asleep on the couch. She's supposed to be home by 10:15. So if she's late, she's breaking curfew. So she goes in to use the phone, call her boyfriend. But she notices the phone jerked out of the wall.
Nasa munuin ko, sakay ka lang ng per-view dyan.
Yung mga ano dyan, UV.
So she comes back to the kitchen. And she sees her mother covered in blood. So she runs to her dad. And she's screaming. She sees her dad in a pool of blood. Then she realizes her dad is dead too.
Jennifer finds a phone that's working and calls 911.
Kasi sila sa una, nung pumunta kami, nila Roger. Kasi per-view yun, kasi sila ni Roger April. Sa per-view yun sila ni Roger, ang pumunta kami sa kanila yun. Sumakay kami na. Nag-ayala ako ang nag-ano ako Timog. Bumaba. Sakay ko ng bus papuntang Cubao. Bumaba ako ng Timog. Tumawid ako. Pagawid mo papuntang mayroon na yung per-view dun
A kidnapped victim? Was she a participant in this awful crime?
Labas na. Doon po ako kasi nung ako pumunta ko doon ako, nagtimog. Tapos tawid ako. Pagtawid mo doon, may pupunta din doon ng NSO po yun dati. Doon po yan May bus na din, papunta yun doon ng SM Carview. Doon po ako doon. Doon ako sumakay. Pupunta ko ng SM Carview.
Everybody knew everybody.
Mayroon naman din dito sa manuin ko.
He enjoyed the feel that you didn't have to lock the doors. You didn't think about crime. The Wendorfs seemed to be a very normal family. The mom volunteered at the school. The dad had a good job. Jennifer was a cheerleader and was very popular in the school.
In contrast, her 14-year-old sister Heather is moody and rebellious.
Heather was much more introspective, much more into the arts. She wasn't a cheerleader. She wanted to be her own person.
It isn't just her attitude that upsets Mr. and Mrs. Wendorf. It's the company their daughters keep. 15-year-old Rod Ferrell is the town rebel.
Rod Ferrell was the consummate badger. You were looking to worry your parents. And that would be the guy that you brought home.
He was smart. He was fascinating to listen to. And He was very, very good at being superior in a sense.
He was very charismatic. It's not only the way Rod looks and his odd behavior. There are also disturbing rumors flying around town.
We're hearing about vampires.
Rod and his friends were, they were sharing blood. He did tell them that he was a 500-year-old vampire. They would kill themselves and drink blood and confess themselves as vampires.
Finish po natin.
Vampire movies, that was something that was really charismatic and a lot of people got involved in.
Barbers Cut, girl. Opo. Okay. Ang ganda ni Mother. Oh, Jesus. Kahit may edad na po, lilitaw pa rin kagandahan. Siguro nung bata pa po kay Mother, grabe siguro ang ganda niya po, no? Daming mga ras ng bayan. Ras ng bayan. Thank you po, Mother. Model po kayo na sa natin ngayon.